Just talk to them? Oh, okay.
I honestly think that we're all faking it. I think that people also like to talk about themselves. And so I think in being able to frame it in that, I've never had someone reach out to me and say, hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing. Can I come learn more? And me say no. Like, why would I want to say no? So I think, especially in the Midwest, where people tend to, I think, be a little bit more giving, you're going to find that you can get that. And I think, if you email out 10 people, if you don't get yeses from 8, then maybe we should look at what you're writing.
Yeah.
And there are little tweaks that you could make there, but I don't think it's anything to be intimidated about.
Yeah, one thing I coach people on is not to just reach out to like the boss at a place or a director or a manager. Like, reach out to somebody who has the exact same title that you want, or somebody who's doing the job that you want. Invite them out. But I think a lot of people steer towards like the hiring manager or whatever for some. I mean, I get it. I mean, you want to talk to somebody who's going to tell you why they would hire somebody or not hire somebody, right? But I find that I get more value out of talking to the person who's in the position that I would have wanted to be in, and talk to them.
And potentially a peer. So then you could say, what are you looking for in the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis?
Right.
A manager isn't going to be there in the room with you every day. They don't know what it's like necessarily at that level. So by talking to someone that you would be working with day in and day out, you're going to get the best look at what that role could look like.
Well, and especially in today's world, it's very rare that the manager just hires the person alone. They always bring in team members, So if you're not engaged with those team members, then when you walk in that room, you're going to hear something different. The manager is looking for something different than that peer group would be.
And how are you going to know if it's a good cultural fit?
Right.
I've applied for jobs and gone into interviews where I feel like, yes, the day-to-day of what this role seems to be would be perfect. But then the culture and the people didn't excite me as much, and just knew then that it wasn't the right opportunity.
Right. So let's go back to your startup days for a little bit. So in a startup, you're wearing a lot of hats. You're doing everything from data analysis to taking out the garbage in some cases. And I've always had fun with startups. I've had my the benefit of joining some and being a part of them. But I think it takes a certain personality in some cases to be okay with the craziness that can go on. And people can tell you all they want about what crazy means, but until you experience it, it's completely different, right?
You get whiplash from the direction changes day to day, or sometimes minute to minute.
Yeah.
And I think that in my role in particular, I needed to be more comfortable with winging it and figuring out how to contribute. And when I was the managing director of Girls in Tech, that was easy because I was overseeing it and I could lead the direction and I could say, hey, we need a mentorship program. This would be really valuable.
Yeah.
And then once I think of that, I can think of the steps that are needed. But if I'm working on a subset or I don't feel like I have that ownership, it can be harder to know what direction to take things. And so I think that in startups in particular, it's really important to be comfortable with the ambiguity and knowing that something that you spend an entire week on might be throwaway work.
Get thrown out the window. Right. Or vice versa. If you're in a larger organization, this thing that you were able to knock out in a week might seem ridiculous because normally this type of thing takes 6 months to do, right? People are like, I don't trust this idea. Like, it didn't go through enough committees.
So many committees.
I love the
meetings about meetings.
Meetings about meetings. Yeah. Well, yeah. When I was I was lucky enough to, in my early career, work at UHG for a while. And it's such a different world. I mean, especially for me, this was a long time ago. But at the time, my manager was more concerned with that I was in my chair at 8 a.m. Than they were in the work that I was producing. Keeping
it warm.
Yep, exactly. And I know it's not like that there now, but back then it was pretty regimented. But it goes back to something I like to talk about with my guests a lot, and I want to get your opinion, Kate, is that a generation or two ago, in order to be a manager, like to be in charge of a group, I mean, you had to have some sort of training, like professional. You might have even had to go to college for management school, right? But these days, a lot of times it's like, oh, you're the best developer, you're in charge of the dev team. Or you're the best designer, you're the senior designer now, and you're in charge of these things, right? And I get it, like that developer designer might not want to manage people, but it's really hard to say no to those promotions, because who doesn't want to make more money, get more respect, get a air quotes seat at the table, right? But then there's no way they're going to go and tell somebody that don't want to manage somebody. That's like saying, I can't do this job, right?
Right.
And I know that as you've grown in your career, you've probably been presented with those different opportunities as well. But, how have you balanced the whole idea of like being a people manager versus like a senior architect or, technician, right?
That's a very important question, because they're very different skill sets. Mm-hmm. I personally like the people management and working on different things and dealing with different problems that aren't always easily solved through technology or development. And I also think that it's important to have people that are driven by that people component in those roles as managers. I've seen what you were just describing of many cases where it's a senior developer promoted to a manager, and now all of a sudden they're not doing on a daily basis what they are so good at.
Yeah.
And, even on my team now, I look at some of the things that they're producing, and I'm like, I could never do this. So I'm going to make it my role to clear out any roadblocks that are in the way and enable them to do the best work that they can do. And I think that is the role of a manager. Why should the best engineer on the team waste, a couple days every couple of months on reviews?
Right.
What value does that add?
Another thing I want to talk about, how have you found success, Kate, in managing up or across? Have you, what sort of things have worked for you to gain alignment with your management or the people managing you?
I think it's helpful to figure out the expectations of how a manager likes to be communicated with. I think that, everyone has different levels of formality that they like. And by being able to adapt to different styles, I feel I'm more effective. I know that there are some that want to know every little piece of information that led to a certain decision. And then on the other side, there are some that are just like, send me 5 bullets a week of what you did, and that's enough. And being able to adapt and adjust to that is what I've found success in. Yeah.
I have people I've given that same advice to, and they come to me and say, well, but they're my manager. Shouldn't they just want to figure out what's going on? Like, why do I have to change my style? Like, can't they just manage me the way I'm at?
Yeah, and did they stay in that role for very long?
No, not very long.
Yeah, exactly.
What is the difference between what makes a senior engineer versus an engineer? When do you look at this person and their performance and their impact and say, aha, senior?
Well, I feel like I'm going to give the very prescriptive answer, which is kind of, are they meeting expectations or exceeding expectations and really challenging themselves to continue learning? Because there are people that are really good at what they do, but that doesn't mean that they should be promoted or go to the next level. There's this thing in American culture, at the very least, where people are promoted over what their capabilities are. And so I don't know if it's so much a, standard developer versus senior developer, but it's more about the role and the fit. Especially at the company I'm at now, I don't feel like titles mean much. They kind of throw just a bunch of words together.
Yeah.
So I think, it's more important on, are you continuing to challenge yourself, and are you interested in going up to that next level? Because like you were saying before, there are some people that just could not care less about the bureaucracies or being required to give high-level executive summaries. Some are just like, no, I want to build what I build.
Yeah. So in terms of like additional learning and growing, you mentioned things like meetups, and you also do a podcast. Tell me about the podcast.
I was in business school, and having been in the technology industry, was looking at entertainment, which is what brought me to DreamWorks. And I realized that it wasn't necessarily the industries that I was so fascinated by, but it was women within that. So the work that I did with girls in tech was so inspiring for me, and I wanted to recreate that. So I think part of what interested me in entertainment was being able to tell those stories and celebrate women. And so it was actually my last semester at MIT, I did a capstone project where I filmed 4 different interviews that I conducted of women in business, and tried to use that to hone my storytelling capability and figure out what it was I wanted to do, because I still had no idea at that point.
Sure.
And there was one interview in particular where the woman and I stumbled upon the fact that both of our mothers were alcoholics, and we had gone through more difficult childhoods. And the excitement that I felt leaving that meeting, knowing that I wasn't alone, is what captivated me. And so I said, I need to recreate this. And so I've been thinking about it over the last 2 years now. It took me to actually finally take the plunge. Thank you, by the way, for pushing me into it. But the podcast is called Drinks with Her, and I just meet up with women. We usually are drinking a cocktail, and we talk about our childhoods and struggles that we've gone through and the impacts that has had on us now being adults. So it's a way to, I hope, inspire other people by knowing that they're not alone in whatever it is that they're going through, and that you can go through really crappy things and still turn out all right.
I enjoy the podcast, and it's I like how casual it is, but yet I enjoy how just transparent you and your guests are. The first episode I loaded up, it was like the first thing you said was like, so what was it like coming out to your parents? I was like, whoa, we just right with the right hook right out front.
I do level set those expectations, but I do want it to be more than talking to a woman in business.
Yeah.
I want to know the raw side, the vulnerable side of who they are as people.
Right, not just the label.
It's because people don't talk about this stuff. If you didn't listen to that episode on the podcast, you would never have imagined some of the experiences that these people went through.
Right.
And I think that knowing and accepting people for their whole self makes it easier for everyone else to talk about the things that they're going through. And it enables us all to see each other as whole people, rather than having your professional self and your family self. And I don't know if this is just a millennial thing or what, but I think that things definitely are changing. Some of my mom, for example, she's just like, I can't believe you talk about these things, especially because she often is a topic on the podcast. Sure. But for me, I'm real. I am who I am, and I'm not going to put on different lenses. And my guests know that when we sit down to have a drink.
Well, yeah, it's a good show. I'm excited to learn from it, because that's one reason why, just like you said, that's why I do this podcast, because it's been the best learning tool I've ever had. I wish I would have done it years ago, just like you said. So yeah, I wish you the most success with it. I think it's great.
Thank you. You just got to start.
Right?
I was talking about it for 2 years and finally met up with you for coffee. And you're like, why haven't you started? What's holding you back? Good question.
Start.
Yeah, just do it. Okay.
I mean, well, the worst thing that's going to happen is that you're not going to do it.